Apparently, "Sir, step out of the vehicle" is now the social cue for people to reveal the exact moment their brain went on airplane mode. And trust me, whatever disaster you're imagining, that's just the warm-up for what follows. 1. A guy stepped out of his car the way people exit an Uber when they're already embarrassed, and before the officer could speak, he blurted out that his performance was lagging because the GPS satellites were bullying him today. He explained this like a man giving a TED Talk no one asked for, insisting that invisible space technology had singled him out emotionally, causing his steering to feel judged. The officer, who presumably did not have a minor in astrophysics, asked for clarification, and the man doubled down, claiming he could feel the satellites laughing whenever he drifted across the lane. At this point, even the car seemed exhausted, leaning slightly as if trying to step away from him. When the officer informed him this was not, in fact, a federal harassment case, the man looked betrayed, like technology had personally broken up with him. And despite the cosmic melodrama, the only malfunction present was between his ears. 2. A woman hopped out of her vehicle with all the confidence of a person who believes the universe works on her personal Wi-Fi frequency, then calmly announced that she wasn't speeding. Her speedometer was manifesting too aggressively. She said this with a straight face, as if explaining a paranormal event rather than her inability to read numbers. According to her, the car had become spiritually over-caffeinated, and she had intentionally avoided looking at the dashboard because she didn't want to feed the energy. The officer stared at her the way people stare at a microwave that refuses to stop beeping, unsure whether to ignore it or unplug the entire house. When asked why she didn't simply slow down, she replied that interrupting the car's emotional expression would be toxic behavior. It was the first time a police report had to include the phrase vehicular feelings. 3. A man stepped out wearing sunglasses so unnecessarily large they looked like he was waiting for paparazzi in a gas station parking lot. Before anyone could ask anything, he announced that he wasn't drunk. His body was just running a different update than everyone else. He explained this with the assurance of a tech bro defending a vaporware startup, claiming his liver had deprecated certain functions and his balance issues were part of an experimental patch. While he attempted to demonstrate his stability by standing on one foot, gravity filed a restraining order, and he immediately wobbled sideways like a folding chair giving up. The officer asked if he'd been drinking, and he insisted that alcohol doesn't affect him because he's not backward compatible with reality. His attempt at a field sobriety test resembled a beta feature crashing live on stage, proving once again that the only thing updated was his ability to tell a believable lie. 4. A guy flung his car door open mid-sentence, declaring that he had already diagnosed the real culprit, which, according to him, was the moon. Not figuratively, the actual moon. He claimed its emotional gravitational pull had hijacked his steering wheel, and he delivered this breakdown like a horoscope blogger explaining why Mercury ruined their week. He insisted he drove perfectly during crescent phases, but became unpredictable under a full moon because it activates the wolf within. The officer asked if he was implying he transformed into a werewolf behind the wheel, and in an act of loyalty to his own nonsense, he clarified that he was not a werewolf, merely lunar-influenced. His attempt to reenact the moon's interference involved hand gestures normally reserved for interpretive dance. Ultimately, the only thing howling that night was the siren as his cosmic defense evaporated under basic Earth laws. 5. A woman stepped out of her car holding her purse like a shield, announcing that her car wasn't swerving. She was participating in a social experiment. When asked who authorized this experiment, she said, "The scientific community," which is usually code for, "I made it up right this second." She insisted she was gathering data on how police interpret movement, as if she were conducting a dissertation from inside a Walmart parking lot. The officer checked if she was joking, but her expression suggested she believed she was moments away from publishing in a prestigious journal titled Random Chaos Quarterly. Even when asked why she didn't simply drive normally, she explained that predictable behavior lacks innovation. Her car, meanwhile, sat behind her, looking like a tired lab rat forced into a study nobody funded. The officer shut down her research program immediately, citing peer review by common sense. 6. A man exited his vehicle with the swagger of someone convinced he was starring in an action movie instead of standing on the shoulder of a highway. Before the officer could ask a single question, he proclaimed that he wasn't drifting across lanes. He was testing the car's loyalty. He elaborated that a truly committed vehicle should know what its owner wants intuitively, and if it didn't, he needed to challenge its trust. The officer attempted to understand this logic and failed instantly. The man explained that swerving was actually a bonding exercise, something he'd read about online, which is a phrase that should automatically trigger a breathalyzer. His reenactment of the alleged loyalty test involved tugging an imaginary leash, making the whole scene resemble a confused dog trainer lecturing a sedan. Unfortunately for him, the only thing his car was loyal to at that point was physics. 7. A woman stepped out looking personally offended that the universe had inconvenienced her evening, and she immediately blamed everything on her sleep-driving disorder. She described this with the authority of someone diagnosing a patient on a medical drama, claiming she sometimes enters a dreamlike automotive trance, where her body drives but her spirit is somewhere on a beach. The officer asked how she managed to respond to flashing lights if she was supposedly unconscious, and she explained that her subconscious respects law enforcement. She then attempted to demonstrate her condition by closing her eyes and pretending to navigate an invisible wheel, which made her appear less like a patient and more like someone auditioning for a community theater production titled Delusional Road Trip. Unsurprisingly, no doctor corroborated her diagnosis, unless you count the imaginary one she apparently consults in REM sleep. 8. A man stepped out with both hands raised like he'd been caught stealing a pizza slice from the fridge at 2 a.m., and he immediately confessed to what he called vehicular stage fright. He claimed his car behaves perfectly when alone, but panics when another vehicle appears, causing it to freeze, jerk, or accelerate unpredictably. According to him, traffic is essentially a talent show, and his sedan just isn't ready for an audience. The officer listened with the same expression teachers get when a kid turns in a drawing titled, "Math is a suggestion." When pressed for clarification, the man insisted the headlights from other cars made his vehicle self-conscious, especially at night when it's on display. His reenactment involved soothing his car's side mirror like it was a stressed chihuahua. Sadly, the only thing experiencing stage fright during the stop was his dignity. 9. A woman stepped out already mid-explanation, claiming that her braking problems weren't mechanical, they were philosophical. She believed her car was going through an existential phase and didn't believe in stopping as a concept. She said this with the serene confidence of someone who has never successfully completed a logic puzzle. According to her, every time she pressed the brake pedal, the car rejected the request because it refuses to submit to arbitrary road norms. The officer asked if gravity was also optional in her worldview, which she ignored in favor of describing her car as a free thinker. Her demonstration of this alleged rebellion involved tapping the brakes lightly, while explaining the deeper symbolic meaning behind not slowing down. Her license plate should have read, "Powered by Pretension," because the only philosophical crisis happening was the officer questioning how humanity had survived this long. 10. A man stepped out with the dramatic flair of someone arriving to accept an award for most confusing human, immediately blaming his lane drifting on car yoga. He claimed he was trying to help his vehicle stretch its frame after a long day, comparing the process to downward dog for sedans. His tone suggested he considered himself a trailblazer in automotive wellness. The officer tried to clarify whether he was deliberately swerving, to which he responded. The car was releasing tension. He then demonstrated a pose he called highway warrior, which looked suspiciously like someone too tipsy to stand upright. His belief that cars need holistic alignment rather than mechanical alignment was both bold and deeply incorrect. While yoga might offer inner peace, drifting across 3 lanes offers paperwork, tow trucks, and new charges. The only thing getting stretched that night was the officer's patience. 11. A woman stepped out of her vehicle with all the calm of someone asking for directions, then casually informed the officer that she wasn't speeding. Her car was just excited to be outside. She spoke about it the way parents speak about toddlers at a zoo, implying her vehicle had been cooped up too long and was finally letting loose. According to her, cars need to run free occasionally, as though highways are meadows and speed limits are merely the fences we put up to ruin the fun. The officer pointed out that her excited car had been going 94 miles per hour, to which she responded, "Well, wouldn't you?" Her defense rested entirely on anthropomorphism and denial, a combination rarely featured in legal textbooks. The officer concluded that while her car may enjoy fresh air, it would now be experiencing fresh paperwork instead. 12. A man stepped out looking offended that anyone had interrupted his evening, and he immediately clarified that he wasn't drifting. He was letting the car choose its own path. He described this approach as vehicular empowerment, the automotive equivalent of letting a toddler plan the family vacation. According to him, forcing a car to stay in one lane is controlling behavior, and he preferred to let his sedan express itself. The officer, attempting to process this sudden manifesto on steering autonomy, asked if he also allowed his appliances to follow their dreams. Without hesitation, the man said yes, and mentioned that his toaster has leadership potential. His explanation of free-range driving didn't pair well with the dashcam footage, which captured what looked more like a Roomba with vertigo. Ultimately, the only journey his car chose was the one ending in an impound lot. 13. A woman stepped out already apologizing, not for the speeding, but for the time distortion bubble she claimed she had driven through. She explained this the way sci-fi fans explain plot holes, saying that distance and time had briefly lost their relationship, causing her to arrive at the wrong speed. The officer, whose training did not include quantum mechanics, asked her to elaborate, and she dove deeper, describing a moment when the road pulled backward while the car moved forward. Her gesture-heavy demonstration made her look like she was stirring an invisible cauldron of nonsense. She insisted this wasn't her fault, but the fault of temporal turbulence, a condition she claimed affects certain highways during energetic weather. Unfortunately for her, the officer did not have the authority to ticket space-time, but did have the authority to deal with reckless drivers who blame physics for their choices. 14. A man stepped out with the confidence of someone about to unveil a groundbreaking invention, then revealed that his erratic driving was due to a trust exercise he was performing with his cruise control. He explained that relationships, human or mechanical, require moments of vulnerability, and he was simply letting the car take the lead. The officer asked if he understood how cruise control works, and the man nodded proudly, saying, "It's like autopilot, except emotional." He believed that loosening his grip on the wheel would strengthen their bond, as though his sedan were a therapy animal capable of interpersonal growth. The actual result, captured clearly on the dashcam, was a vehicle drifting like a bored teenager doodling on a notebook. His attempt to frame this incident as a team-building activity didn't impress the officer, whose only interest was ensuring no one else became part of this misguided couple's retreat. 15. A woman stepped out of her car clutching her keys like evidence in a trial she was definitely losing, and she immediately insisted the real issue wasn't her driving. It was that the officer had startled her aura. She claimed her energy field had been in perfect alignment until flashing lights disrupted her vibrations, causing her steering to wobble. She described this phenomenon with the dedication of someone pitching a wellness app, explaining how certain frequencies interfere with her intuitive navigation system. The officer asked whether her aura had also caused her to run a stop sign, and she nodded confidently, saying her spirit was in glide mode. Her attempt to demonstrate aura-based driving involved fluttering her hands like she was trying to communicate with a houseplant. Unfortunately for her metaphysical defense strategy, the court recognizes turn signals but has yet to endorse chakras as a traffic control device. 16. A man stepped out of his truck clutching a half-eaten sandwich like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom drama, immediately announcing that he couldn't be held responsible for his driving because he was under direct attack from gluten. According to his explanation, which he delivered with the passion of someone testifying before a Senate committee, his sandwich had triggered an emotional allergy, causing his steering wheel to feel unsafe to hold. He claimed the bread was sabotaging his motor skills and insisted that pulling him over was essentially taking the sandwich's side. The officer asked the obvious follow-up question, why he kept eating the sandwich if it was attacking him. He replied that he didn't want the gluten to win, as though he were engaged in a personal war against carbohydrates. His attempt to reenact the gluten ambush mostly involved waving the sandwich around like it was a wild animal. The only thing rising that night wasn't the dough, it was his list of charges. 17. A woman stepped out of her minivan with the exhausted sigh of someone who believes the world keeps inconveniencing her on purpose, and she immediately blamed her erratic driving on her car's spiritual awakening. She explained, very seriously, that her vehicle had recently entered a transitional phase and no longer felt aligned with the straight, rigid lines of modern roadways. According to her, the minivan had become increasingly free-spirited, choosing to drift because the universe resists confinement. When the officer asked whether she understood that lanes are not optional, she shook her head and said he shouldn't suppress the journey of another being. She even offered to demonstrate how her van communicates feelings through vibration patterns, which turned out to be the sound of worn-out shocks begging for a mechanic. Her defense suggested she believed she was driving a sentient yoga instructor rather than a 12-year-old Chrysler. 18. A man stepped out wearing gym shorts, flip-flops, and the confidence of someone who absolutely should not have that much confidence, and he immediately declared that he wasn't speeding, he was carb loading for the engine. He explained that his vehicle runs better after pasta night, and because he had eaten an athletic amount of fettuccine, his car was naturally inspired to move faster. He compared the situation to racehorses getting skittish before a race, except his horse was a dented hatchback barely meeting inspection standards. When asked what carbs have to do with a combustion engine, he told the officer that energy is contagious, and the car was mirroring his metabolic surge. His reenactment involved jogging in place to demonstrate the pasta's effects, something no police manual prepares anyone for. The only energy contagious at that moment was the officer's rising level of disbelief. 19. A woman stepped out, already fanning herself dramatically, insisting the flashing lights behind her had overstimulated her internal compass. She explained she has an innate navigation system that functions flawlessly except when exposed to aggressive luminescence, which she claimed scrambled her spatial awareness. According to her, speed limits only work when her inner gyroscope is calm. The officer asked if this gyroscope was perhaps located in the same place as common sense, but she ignored the question in favor of describing her body as a delicate instrument reacting to cosmic overstimulation. Her attempt to demonstrate her compromised internal compass looked more like someone pretending to faint at a Victorian opera. She maintained that the real solution wasn't a ticket, it was dimmer police lights. Ultimately, the only compass malfunctioning belonged to her ability to navigate responsibility. 20. A man stepped out with the majestic authority of a person who has never once checked a manual, then announced that his car's mild swerving was due to a feature update he had installed himself. Apparently, he had downloaded what he believed was performance software, which turned out to be a sketchy file from a forum that definitely ended with .exe and a warning label. He insisted his car was now more advanced and capable of adaptive pathfinding, which sounded impressive until the officer mentioned that adaptive pathfinding shouldn't resemble a confused shopping cart. The man tried to justify the chaos by claiming he was simply training the algorithm, as though his sedan were a confused robot dog struggling through obedience school. Unfortunately for him, the only thing his car successfully downloaded was the digital equivalent of a personality defect. 21. A woman stepped out of her vehicle holding a travel mug like it was a sacred relic, explaining that her driving wasn't reckless, just caffeinated beyond reason. She insisted that her triple-shot drink had linked minds with her engine, causing both of them to behave with enthusiastic urgency. According to her, the coffee had created a synchronized velocity moment, meaning she and her car were speeding together in a kind of caffeinated duet. The officer noted she had blown through 2 stop signs, which she described as chance encounters. Her car politely declined. Her attempt to reenact the mental fusion between espresso and horsepower mostly involved wide eyes and shaky hand gestures. If anything, she seemed powered by enough caffeine to vibrate through the Earth's crust. 22. A man stepped out looking deeply offended at the officer's existence, immediately stating he wasn't weaving. He was mapping potholes for the city. This heroic explanation came with no official affiliation, no tools, and no evidence besides his creative imagination. He claimed that his erratic driving was part of a grassroots infrastructure initiative and suggested the officer should actually thank him for his service. When asked how drifting into oncoming lanes helps the city, he said potholes speak to him, and he must follow where they guide. His demonstration involved pointing at random spots on the road and nodding sagely, like a monk communing with asphalt spirits. Needless to say, the city had not hired him as an honorary pavement whisperer. 23. A woman stepped out clutching a guidebook to local birds, insisting her speeding was necessary because she was in pursuit of a rare sighting. She claimed the bird, unnamed, unverified, and possibly imaginary, had flown ahead of her car, prompting her to pursue it for conservation reasons. The officer asked whether conservation typically involves going 30 miles per hour over the limit, and she explained that nature waits for no one. She reenacted the chase by pointing at the sky and describing the bird's teasing swoops, though the sky was entirely empty and had been for quite some time. She framed the whole thing as an act of environmental stewardship, overlooking the fact that her biggest impact on nature at that moment would be a rapidly rising carbon footprint. 24. A man stepped out already sweating like someone who had just sprinted through his own bad decisions, claiming he swerved only because he was dodging invisible obstacles. When asked to elaborate, he explained that he had been practicing a heightened perception technique from a book written by a self-proclaimed mystic with a website that probably sells unicorn crystals. According to him, the obstacles exist between realities, and he was simply moving in harmony with them. The officer, who presumably did not minor in interdimensional traffic control, asked him to identify even one obstacle. The man waved vaguely at the air like a magician, revealing nothing. His driving record suggested the only obstacle he needed to dodge was the truth. 25. A woman stepped out with the nervous smile of someone trying to charm their way out of a catastrophic decision, explaining that she wasn't texting while driving. She was documenting her journey for historical purposes. She believed future generations would want a minute-by-minute archive of her trip to a strip mall smoothie shop. According to her, filming herself drifting across lanes added authentic tension to her documentary. The officer asked what audience she believed she was serving, and she answered, "Society." Her phone, recovered from the seat, revealed 5 minutes of shaky footage that resembled a found-footage horror film starring her forehead. Her documentation project ended not with an award, but with a ticket. 26. A man stepped out wearing a reflective vest he definitely bought at a hardware store 20 minutes earlier, introducing himself as a volunteer traffic consultant. He claimed he'd taken it upon himself to stress test the road design, which apparently required ignoring every known traffic law. He argued that his unpredictable maneuvers were actually data collection, and that stopping him was interfering with civic progress. The officer asked who he reported to, and he confidently responded, "The people." His demonstration of consulting procedures involved pointing at the road and nodding with deep fake wisdom, like a toddler pretending to be an architect. His vest remained the most legitimate thing about his operation. 27. A woman stepped out already rehearsing her speech, declaring that her speeding was the result of a time-sensitive emotional emergency. She explained her heart had accelerated with urgency, compelling her foot to mirror it. She spoke as though her circulatory system were a legal entity capable of issuing commands. The officer asked whether this emergency required medical attention, and she replied that it required self-reflection, which apparently could only be achieved at 92 miles per hour. Her claim that speeding was a form of emotional release made her sound less like a driver and more like a motivational speaker gone rogue on a highway. Therapy would have been cheaper and slower. 28. A man stepped out clutching a small plastic trophy, explaining that he had just come from his nephew's T-ball ceremony and was still in champion mode. According to him, the adrenaline from shaking a child's hand while holding a participation trophy caused his reflexes to enter competitive overdrive. He claimed his speeding was a natural consequence of victory momentum. The officer asked whether he often confuses children's sports with NASCAR. The man nodded proudly, saying competition transcends context. His trophy, which read "Most Improved Listener," had absolutely nothing to do with his driving, though the irony was stunning. 29. A woman stepped out with calm, almost bored annoyance, explaining that she hadn't actually been swerving. The Earth had. She clarified that tectonic plates had shifted unexpectedly, causing subtle movements beneath her tires that only she had the sensitivity to detect. According to her, the real problem wasn't her driving but the planet's refusal to hold still like a responsible celestial body. The officer asked if she also blamed earthquakes for running red lights. She replied that she wouldn't rule it out. Her reenactment of plate tectonics looked like someone trying to balance on a gently rolling exercise ball, except she was standing on perfectly stable ground. Ultimately, her scientific theory ranked only slightly lower than flat Earth cosmology, but her commitment to it deserved its own geological era. And that's the grand tour of vehicular genius, a parade of excuses so dumb they deserve their own traffic laws. Drop your favorite disaster in the comments, vote on the worst, and buckle up for the next round of chaos.